vehicle. Drop the nozzle. Do it now.
I am filling my tank. I have done nothing wrong. I am not moving.
You're defying a federal agent. We have a warrant for your
I'm a federal.
Agent Bradley Miller had heard those words before. He had heard suspects claim to be lawyers, doctors, diplomats, and even royalty in a desperate attempt to avoid custody. In his mind, this was just another lie from another suspect who matched a description that was vague enough to apply to half the population. But Agent Miller had absolutely no idea that the man standing next to pump number 4, the man he was currently screaming at in front of a dozen terrified witnesses, was the Honorable Marcus Sterling. Judge Sterling was the Chief Judge of the United States District Court for the Eastern District. He had spent 35 years studying the Constitution, interpreting federal law, and sentencing the most dangerous criminals in the state. He had signed the very warrants that agents like Miller used to do their jobs, and in less than 20 minutes, Agent Miller's decision to ignore the badge, ignore the credentials, and ignore the law itself would trigger a chain reaction that would destroy his career, humiliate his agency, and cost the taxpayers a staggering $9 million. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. This was a case of an officer seeing a black man in a suit and deciding that his bias was more accurate than the federal identification in the man's hand. What happened next at that gas station was captured on security cameras, body cameras, and bystander cell phones, creating a digital record of a civil rights disaster that the government could not hide from. Before we dive deeper into this absolutely shocking story, I need you to do something. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching from, your country, your state, wherever you are. And if you believe in holding authority figures accountable when they abuse their power, hit that subscribe button. This story gets even more intense, and you don't want to miss the details of the lawsuit that followed. To understand the magnitude of this mistake, you have to understand the man they targeted. Judge Marcus Sterling was not someone who lived in the shadows. At 62 years old, he was a pillar of the legal community. He was a man who believed in order, in procedure, and in the absolute sanctity of the law. Sterling had grown up in the segregated South, the son of a sharecropper who taught him that dignity was something you carried in your spine, not something given to you by others. He had attended Howard University on a full academic scholarship, graduating at the top of his class, before moving on to Yale Law School. His career was legendary. He had started as a public defender, fighting for the indigent, before becoming a federal prosecutor who took down organized crime syndicates in the 1990s. When he was appointed to the federal bench 15 years ago, it was a unanimous confirmation by the Senate. His colleagues described him as the iron gavel, stern, meticulous, and completely unshakable. He was known for his encyclopedic knowledge of the Fourth Amendment. He had written landmark opinions on search and seizure laws. He had lectured at the FBI Academy on the proper limits of law enforcement authority. On that Tuesday afternoon, Judge Sterling was returning from a judicial conference in the state capitol. He was driving his personal vehicle, a pristine 2022 black Lexus LS, a car he kept immaculately clean. He was wearing a bespoke navy suit, a silk tie, and a Patek Philippe watch that had been a gift from his late wife. He was 62 years old, gray-haired, and moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a man who commanded courtrooms with a single look. He had stopped at the Shell station off Interstate 95 to refuel and get a bottle of water. He was standing by his car, watching the gallons tick upward on the pump display, thinking about the briefs he needed to review that evening. He was doing nothing illegal. He was doing nothing suspicious. He was a federal judge pumping gas in broad daylight, but to the two men watching him from an unmarked SUV across the lot, Marcus Sterling was just a target. Agent Bradley Miller had been with Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE for 8 years. On paper, he was an active, productive agent. In reality, his personnel file was a minefield of red flags that his supervisors had chosen to ignore for nearly a decade. Miller had 14 complaints filed against him in 8 years. That is nearly 2 complaints a year, a rate that was 400% higher than the agency average. The complaints told a consistent, disturbing story. A Hispanic business owner in Miami claimed Miller detained him for an hour because he looked nervous. A black college professor alleged Miller threatened to deport him during a jaywalking stop, despite the professor being a U.S. citizen born in Ohio. An Asian software engineer reported that Miller had searched his car without consent, tossing his laptop and equipment onto the roadside rain. In every single case, the Internal Review Board cleared Miller. They called his actions aggressive but within policy. They noted his high arrest numbers and labeled him proactive. They sent him to sensitivity training seminars that he clicked through online without reading. They kept him on the street because he got results, even if those results were built on constitutional violations. Miller was 34 years old, known for his tactical gear and his short fuse. He liked the power the badge gave him. He liked the fear he saw in people's eyes when he approached. On this Tuesday, he was on a task force looking for a fugitive named Dante Williams. The warrant for Dante Williams described a black male, 26 years old, approximately 59, driving a stolen 2010 Honda Accord. Judge Sterling was 62 years old. He was 62. He was driving a 2022 Lexus. The discrepancies were massive. The age difference was 36 years. The height difference was 5 inches. The car was completely different. But Agent Miller didn't care about details. He saw a black man in a black car at a gas station near the highway, and his bias filled in the rest. He told his partner, a rookie agent named Sarah Jenkins who had only been on the job for 4 months, "That's him, that's the guy." Jenkins hesitated. "The car doesn't match Brad, and he looks older. Suspects switch cars," Miller snapped. "And criminals age fast. Let's move." The unmarked SUV screeched across the pavement, coming to a halt at an angle that blocked Judge Sterling's Lexus from leaving. The sudden noise made several other customers look up. A mother pumping gas into her minivan 2 pumps over pulled her children close. A truck driver eating a sandwich in his cab put down his lunch and reached for his phone. Judge Sterling heard the tires screech, but he didn't panic. He assumed it was reckless driving. He didn't even turn around until he heard the doors slam and the shouting begin. "Federal agents, hands where I can see them." Judge Sterling turned slowly. He saw 2 people in tactical vests rushing toward him. One, the male agent, had his hand on his holster. The female agent looked nervous, hanging back slightly. "Step away from the vehicle. Drop the nozzle. Do it now," Miller screamed. This was the moment captured on the CCTV footage. Judge Sterling assessed the situation instantly. He saw the tactical vests. He saw the ice patches. He knew they were federal agents, and he knew with absolute certainty that they were making a mistake. "I am filling my tank," Sterling said, his voice deep and projecting clearly, the same voice he used to overrule objections. "I have done nothing wrong. I am not moving." Miller closed the distance. He was fueled by adrenaline and the assumption that anyone who didn't immediately cower was a threat. He got within inches of the judge's face. "You are defying a federal agent. We have a warrant for your arrest. Get on the ground." Sterling looked at him with a mix of pity and steel. "I am a federal district judge." Miller laughed. It was a harsh, barking laugh. "Yeah, and I'm the tooth fairy. On the ground now." "Officer," Sterling said, using the generic term intentionally, "I am going to reach into my inner jacket pocket. I am going to produce my federal credentials. You are going to look at them, and then you are going to leave." "Don't you reach for anything," Miller yelled, drawing his taser. "If you reach, I will light you up." The gas station had gone silent. The hum of the pump seemed to amplify the tension. The truck driver was filming now, his phone held steady against the steering wheel. Judge Sterling froze. He knew the law. He knew that if he reached for his ID now, this unstable agent might actually shoot him. He slowly raised his empty hands. The gas nozzle still clicked into his car's tank behind him. "My hands are visible," Sterling said. "My credentials are in my left breast pocket. My name is Marcus Sterling. I am the Chief Judge of the Eastern District. You are making a mistake that will end your career." "Turn around," Miller shouted. "Hands on the car." Miller didn't wait for compliance. He holstered his taser and grabbed the judge by the shoulder, spinning him around. Sterling stumbled slightly but caught himself against the side of his Lexus. The expensive wool of his suit scraped against the metal. "You are assaulting a federal judge," Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "Title 18, United States Code, Section 111. You are currently committing a felony." Miller ignored him. He kicked Sterling's legs apart. He slammed the judge's chest against the car. He pulled Sterling's arms behind his back, wrenching the shoulders of a 62-year-old man who had recently recovered from rotator cuff surgery. "Stop resisting," Miller yelled for the cameras, even though Sterling was standing perfectly still. "I am not resisting," Sterling said clearly. "I am complying under duress. Everyone here is a witness." Miller slapped the handcuffs on. He ratcheted them tight, too tight. The metal bit into Sterling's wrists. "Search him," Miller ordered Jenkins. Agent Jenkins stepped forward. She was shaking. She had heard the man speak. She had seen the suit. She had seen the car. Nothing about this felt right. "Brad," she whispered. "Maybe we should check his ID first." "Just search him," Miller barked. Jenkins reached into the judge's jacket pocket. Her fingers brushed the silk lining. She pulled out a black leather case. It was heavy. It had a gold seal embossed on the front. She opened it. There it was, the gold badge of the United States Judiciary. The photo ID card, the signature of the Attorney General, the text that read Justice and United States District Judge. Jenkins went pale. She looked at the ID. She looked at the man in handcuffs. She looked at the car. Brad, she said, her voice trembling. It's real, he's a judge. Miller snatched the credentials from her hand. He looked at them. He saw the seal. He saw the photo. For a split second, reality tried to pierce through his bias, but Miller had gone too far. He was in front of a crowd. He had a man in cuffs. To back down now would be to admit he was wrong, to admit he was incompetent, so he doubled down. Fake, Miller said loudly. These are high-quality fakes. This guy is a pro. They aren't fake, Brad, Jenkins said, panic rising in her voice. Look at the hologram. I said they're fake, Miller shouted. He's impersonating a federal officer. That's another felony. Put him in the car. Judge Sterling didn't struggle. He didn't scream. He looked at Miller over his shoulder. Agent, Sterling said, you have just made the decision that will define the rest of your life. I strongly suggest you call your supervisor immediately. Get in the car. Miller shoved him toward the SUV. This is where the situation went from a mistake to a crime. Agent Miller had the evidence in his hands. He had a partner telling him to stop, but his ego and his bias wouldn't let him stop. Do you think officers should face immediate criminal charges for ignoring credentials like this, or should they be protected by qualified immunity? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Judge Sterling was placed in the back of the caged SUV. It smelled of stale sweat and disinfectant. He sat awkwardly, his hands cuffed behind his back, pain radiating through his shoulder. He closed his eyes and began to memorize the timeline. 4:15 p.m. stop initiated. 4:17 p.m. credentials presented. 4:18 p.m. credentials ignored. 4:20 p.m. unlawful arrest. Miller got in the driver's seat. Jenkins got in the passenger side. We're taking him to the local holding facility, Miller said. We'll fingerprint him and run him through the federal database. Then we'll see who he really is. He told you who he is, Jenkins said. Brad, if he's a judge. He's not a judge, look at him. Does he look like a federal judge to you? Yes, Jenkins said quietly. He does. They drove in silence for 15 minutes. Judge Sterling spoke from the back seat. Agent Jenkins, he said calmly. I'm authorizing you to reach into my right pocket. My cell phone is there. You may unlock it with the passcode 1985. You will find a contact listed as Chief Deputy Marshal Henderson. You need to call him. Shut up back there, Miller yelled. Agent Jenkins, Sterling continued, ignoring Miller. You are currently an accessory to a kidnapping. If you make that call, you become a whistleblower. Choose. Jenkins looked at Miller. Miller was staring at the road, knuckles white on the steering wheel. She made her choice. She reached back through the partition gap. Sir, I can't take your phone, but I can call dispatch. Don't do it, Sarah, Miller warned. She grabbed her radio mic. Dispatch Unit 4 Alpha. We have a subject in custody claiming to be Federal Judge Marcus Sterling, requesting immediate verification with U.S. Marshals Service. The radio went silent for a long 3 seconds. Then a new voice came over the air. It wasn't the dispatcher. It was the watch commander. Unit 4 Alpha, say again. You have who in custody? Subject claims to be Judge Marcus Sterling, Jenkins repeated. What is your location? The watch commander's voice was urgent. Heading to county intake. ETA 5 minutes. Unit 4 Alpha, pull over immediately. Do not proceed to intake. I repeat, stop the vehicle. Commander, we have a suspect matching the warrant for. Miller tried to interrupt. Miller, shut UP, the commander screamed over the radio. We just got a call from the director of the U.S. Marshals. They have a GPS panic alert from the judge's vehicle. You are currently being tracked by a tactical team. Pull over now. Judge Sterling smiled in the backseat. He hadn't mentioned the panic button on his key fob. He had pressed it the moment Miller grabbed him. Miller pulled the SUV to the side of the road. His hands were shaking. He looked in the rearview mirror. Sterling met his gaze. Marshals protect federal judges, Agent Miller, Sterling said. They take their job very seriously. Within 2 minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air. Not one siren, dozens. Blue lights flashed from every direction. 3 black SUVs with government plates boxed them in. Heavily armed men in tactical gear poured out of the vehicles. These weren't local cops. These were U.S. Marshals. They had MP5 submachine guns. They were screaming commands. Driver, hands out the window now. Miller put his hands out. Open the door, slowly. Miller opened the door. He was ripped out of the seat, thrown against the pavement, and handcuffed before he could even speak. Agent Jenkins was removed from the passenger side, though more gently. Chief Deputy Marshal Henderson, a man the size of a linebacker, walked to the back door of the ICE vehicle. He opened it. He saw Judge Sterling, disheveled, cuffed, but calm. Henderson looked furious. He looked at Miller, who was face down on the asphalt. You put cuffs on my judge, Henderson growled. He gently helped Sterling out of the vehicle. He removed the handcuffs with his own key. Are you injured, Your Honor? My shoulder requires attention, Sterling said, rubbing his wrist. And my civil rights have been violated, but otherwise I am fine. Sterling walked over to where Miller was being held down by 2 marshals. Miller looked up. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was fear. Officer Miller, Sterling said, looking down at him. You refused to look at my identification because you had already decided who I was. You ignored my credentials because they didn't fit your narrative. You have disgraced your badge. Sterling turned to Henderson. I want him arrested. Assault on a federal officer. Kidnapping. Deprivation of rights under color of law. Book him. Yes, Your Honor, Henderson said. The dashboard camera footage of Miller being arrested by U.S. Marshals, while Judge Sterling watched, was leaked to the press within 24 hours. The video of the gas station encounter, filmed by the truck driver, had already gathered 4 million views on Twitter. The headlines were global. ICE agent arrests chief federal judge. Racial profiling at the pump. The fallout was nuclear. The U.S. Attorney's Office recused itself immediately, sending the case to a special prosecutor in a different district to ensure impartiality. Judge Sterling filed a civil lawsuit against the city, which managed the task force Miller was attached to, the federal government, and Agent Miller personally. The lawsuit alleged Fourth Amendment violations, false imprisonment, assault, and battery. The evidence was insurmountable. The warrant Miller claimed to be executing. It was for a man 36 years younger. The fake credentials, they were verified as authentic by Jenkins on the scene. The body camera footage showed Miller mocking the judge and refusing to look at the ID. The city and the federal government knew they couldn't win. They knew putting Judge Sterling on the stand to testify about how he was treated would result in a verdict that could bankrupt the department. They settled. The total settlement was $9 million. $5 million from the federal government, $4 million from the city's liability insurance. It was one of the largest individual settlements for an unlawful detention in the history of the circuit, but the money was just the beginning. Agent Bradley Miller was terminated 4 days after the incident. The termination letter was scathing. It cited gross incompetence, racial bias, and conduct unbecoming of a federal agent. But Judge Sterling wasn't satisfied with just a firing. He pushed for criminal charges, and he got them. Bradley Miller was indicted by a federal grand jury on 2 counts of deprivation of rights under color of law. He faced a jury not in Sterling's court but in a neighboring district. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Guilty. Miller was sentenced to 36 months in federal prison. He lost his pension. He lost his right to own a firearm. He lost his freedom. Agent Jenkins, who had tried to intervene and eventually called it in, was suspended for 30 days for not acting sooner, but she kept her job. She testified against Miller at his trial. Judge Sterling donated $4 million of his settlement to establish a legal defense fund for indigent defendants who had been victims of racial profiling. He returned to the bench 6 weeks later, after physical therapy for his shoulder. His first day back, the courtroom was packed. Lawyers, reporters, and citizens stood when he entered. He sat down, adjusted his robes, and looked out at the assembly. The law, he said, before starting the docket, is not a suggestion. It is a shield for the innocent and a sword against tyranny, and no one, not even a federal agent, is above it. This wasn't just a mistake. This was proof that for some officers, a black man in a suit is more suspicious than the actual evidence in front of their eyes. Judge Sterling had every credential, every protection, and every advantage a person could have. He was one of the most powerful men in the federal government, and yet for 20 terrifying minutes, he was just another victim of a system that decided he didn't belong. Miller's career is over. That's justice. The city paid $9 million. That's accountability. But money and terminations don't undo the trauma of being handcuffed in front of strangers while begging someone to just look at your ID. The real question is, what happens to the people who aren't federal judges? What happens to the people who don't have U.S. Marshals tracking their car? What happens when there are no cameras? If we don't fix the culture that allowed Agent Miller to rack up 14 complaints without consequence, if we don't address the bias that made him see a fugitive instead of a judge, then we are just waiting for the next viral video. Comment, "Justice served," if you think Miller got what he deserved. And if you believe these stories need to be told, if you believe that accountability starts with exposure, then hit that subscribe button. We are going to keep exposing these patterns. We are going to keep demanding better. This isn't just about one judge or one agent. It's about the world we are willing to accept. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.